Hello, folks. Good day to where you are, and I hope all of you are having a great day today because our new vlog, my new entry right now is we have a special guest, and he's Haikel Fahim from Singapore. So I will be introducing him formally. Haikel Fahim is a journalist based in Singapore. He is Telemedia's regional head for Southeast Asia and the host and founder of the Ironing Board podcast, a show where he raises awareness about social issues, mental health, gender norms, and the present day topics. So, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone around from everywhere around the world, we would like to introduce Mr. Haikel Fahim. Hello, Heiko. Thank you very much for being here on this show, and thank you very much for accepting the invitation.
No, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be thought of for this interview.
Yeah, so jumping ahead for the first question. So you are a journalist, Heiko. Can you share that point in your life when you first started getting interested in becoming a journalist?
Actually, I'd like to correct you slightly. I've never really branded myself as a journalist. I
Oh,
feel
okay.
that I've been in communications. I've been in public relations. And then I think the journalist bit just kind of fully started, sometime last year. Actually, I have written pieces, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
for freelance opportunities previously, made contributions to certain marketing and communications titles previously as well. But I've never really branded myself as a journalist. So I think it's slightly unfair for all the journalists, great journalists out there in the world, yourself included, to for me to take that role as a journalist. I think now, because of my podcast, I see myself as a content creator, a content producer, on top of my day job. Right, I'm a region head of Southeast Asia at Telemedia, as you said,
Yeah.
which is primarily a service that helps both journalists and the PR. So I help mitigate that relationship slightly.
Okay.
But on the other hand, like I said, I run my own podcast series called the Ironing Board, and
Mm-hmm.
for on that I produce the content for the show, interview guests, as how you're doing as well. And I guess in that sense, you can call me a journalist, but I've never really branded myself as one.
I see. So there's a vast difference between these days journalists and also content creators. But then again, these days the information that we receive has always evolved, and
Yep.
I think that it's crucial to really identify those that are considered like genuine journalists and at the same time communicators in
Mm,
general. So in your
yep.
experience as a content creator, what led you to start that interest in interviewing people, getting to
Mm.
know their stories, and engaging conversations that are relevant and informative to your listeners and viewers as well.
Oh, for me, when I first started the earning board, it was mainly based on conversations, day-to-day conversations that I have with friends, with family members,
Mm.
and the one thing that actually sparked it all is a conversation with my wife. Actually,
Oh.
I'm just going to one second, going to turn off my phone because I just heard it like buzzing slightly. But yeah, I was just saying that. Yeah, so it was actually a conversation with my wife, and we said that we were quite worried this sometime during a pandemic, and we said that we were quite worried about our children growing up in a society that can be seen as rather negative. There's loads of negativity that we see that spreads online, a little bit of bashing here, a little bit of bad mouthing there, and everything is done behind a keyboard, and you don't really know what's happening out there. And sometimes it is quite sad to see how certain people are trying to push out an agenda, a social agenda, push out a social message, but it doesn't quite get understood the way that they are hoping it to be. So I thought of just adding on to that conversation in just highlighting some of the issues that I think people don't really feel comfortable talking about, but it is important for the society.
Right.
So like you said earlier, I covered topics around mental health, gender discrimination. I've given voice to migrant workers in Singapore,
Mhm,
which is a huge population who was affected by COVID last year as well.
mhm,
So my role, I think that's where it sparked interest in me in producing content to
mhm.
as betterment of society rather than for myself.
Mhm. So that it's amazing because you first had that conversation with your wife, and um I would consider you as someone who really cares about your children, because these days, society, the norms of society, the values
Mm.
that we believe in society are constantly changing, because people's
Yep.
perception are always evolving based on the recent trends, the recent dialogues about social issues, social justice. And it's amazing that you thought about, making a podcast out of the conversation that and the plans that you shared and have had with your wife. So it's amazing how you took that initiative to, invite people in your show, and to highlight and spark intelligent and informative conversations. So as you have also been involved with um, journalism in Singapore and Southeast Asia in general, Haikel, you are the regional head for Telemedia's Southeast
Mm.
Asia operations. And can you tell us the background of like how you got on board with that profession, and how you're able to, connect with the industry's leading journalists in across Southeast Asia?
Well, I've always been in communications. I've been in either a communications consultancy or in-house, and mainly I used to work with non-profit organizations. I've always been quite keen on doing CSR comms, so corporate social
Mhm.
responsibility comms. So I've always been involved myself in that. So there's always been an element for you to engage with journalists then. So came 2014, there was an opportunity with Telemedia and spoke with one of the directors, and we decided, and I found their mission to be extremely important, which was to connect communicators with the
Mhm.
right journalists. I think that's hugely important, because if we want to get our messages out wherever you are and whatever your agenda is, as a company, as an individual, you must be speaking to the right media, and you must be speaking to the right journalists to make sure that your messaging is being carried out in the right way and right from which you are hoping it to the masses, right?
Mhm.
Be it to affect change in society, to inform, to educate, whatever it may be. So that was the reason why I thought this is a very important service. And so we've grown from strength to strength. Started in Singapore, we had an office in Hong Kong. We've covered 3 different regions right now, namely Southeast Asia, East Asia, and Australia and New Zealand. I head out the Southeast Asian operations and was able to build offices across Southeast Asia as well. So we've now got presence in, Kuala Lumpur, in Manila, in
Mhm.
Jakarta, in Bangkok, and it's always about trying to engage journalists, finding out how they're working, what they're working on, and to ensure that they are able to write the stories that they want. And
Right.
communicators are also able to communicate with the journalists and make sure that they are being approached the way they want to make sure that they have good relations and maintain that, because it's really one of the core operations of communications. And loads of information that journalists carry actually come from news sources such as the communications departments from organizations, be it government to private to public, whatever it might be.
Right. And so you've covered like the scope even beyond Southeast Asia, but let's focus
Mm.
on Southeast Asia in general. Do
Yeah.
you notice that there are differences between the journalism
Yep.
scene in Southeast Asia? Because personally, here in the Philippines, like, so I'm just gonna reveal some issues with the journalism scene here. Journalists are
Sure.
being targeted because there have been some campaigns against journalists because spearheaded by people in authority, because these
Mm.
days journalists are speaking our truth, but then again, people in authority do not want to be investigated. They do not want the truth to be revealed to the public, because they want themselves to be painted with a good image. And journalists always
Mm-hmm.
have that responsibility to, investigate, and to find out and discover that there are discrepancies
Yep.
in their and how they handle their administration. And journalists, because of that, journalists are being targeted, persecuted, and at the same time red tagged, in the most vicious cases. So with your experience connecting with journalists across Southeast Asia, in Thailand, in Myanmar, or in Singapore, what
Mm-hmm.
do you notice are the differences between the journalism scenes in countries covering involved in Southeast Asia?
Well, I think Southeast Asia is one of the most unique regions in the world in the sense that it's not actually very big. It
Mm-hmm.
is very populated, in terms, but in terms of size, it's actually not very big. More interesting to that is that the borders are so close to each other, you'll find a lot of similarities,
Mm-hmm.
but there are also stark differences in terms of language, to economic progression, to politics, and loads of other external factors as well. So it's really interesting to be working in a region that has lots of similarities in terms of, literally how we look, to how we our cultures and food we eat.
Mm-hmm.
But the ways of working are actually quite different from one to another. But the core of journalism is still the same, to
Mm-hmm.
deliver useful information, to be accurate, to be factual,
Mm-hmm.
and to inform the public, right? So the core of news is pretty much still the same.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I mean that those are the main differences that I see. However, to address your earlier point on what's happening in the Philippines, yes, that's really sad. I think just a few years ago, journalism is seen as the most dangerous occupation in the Philippines, and this is a big worry, because if we don't have a safe journalism community, we
Mm-hmm.
aren't able to disseminate the accurate information that we spoke about. And then, over the past few years, I hate the term, but there's the rise of fake news,
Mm-hmm.
and how it is. I mean, fake news. I mean, to me, it's either fake or it's news. This it's not.
Yes.
You can't have fake news. But that's the term that's widely understood now.
Mm-hmm.
And how credible journalism is extremely important in our society and in the region. And we've seen issues as well with COVID-19, where, lots of misinformation are happening across the region, and the levels of misinformation are so different to one another. The levels of severity of the pandemic from one country to another in Southeast Asia was also very different. How we are able to tackle those issues locally are also very different. So there are different challenges that each particular market are dealing with. And also because we are talking about varying degrees of size in terms of population and land mass actually within Southeast Asia. I mean, comparing Indonesia to Singapore, we are a tiny little red dot. So there in places such as Philippines, in places such as Indonesia, there are hyper local content that are very, very important. So meaning, for you, Angelo, like in Mindanao, what you guys are interested in is compared to in Manila. Whereas in a hub like Singapore, every bit of news is national news, is carried
Mm-hmm.
in everywhere. But it's different for communities or population which are larger in size.
Right. And so because of that, there's a difference between the coverage of and also the extent where the news is disseminated, right? So um
Exactly.
which goes me to a more specific context of Haikel. So what's it like being a journalist in Singapore? So to specify my point, like are the journalists being treated well, or are they do they have the liberty to cover stories that are I don't know, or do they have the same like freedom that many journalists in first world countries? Because I believe that Singapore is a very progressive, very developed, well developed
Mhm.
country, and like are they not being like what are their challenges, what are their um like what makes journalists in Singapore empowered, or like what's it like being like, I'm interested to know what are the like
Sure.
disadvantages of journalism in Singapore and also the empowering points of being a journalist in Singapore.
I think, well, I mean, I can't speak for all journalists, and what I'm about to say is solely my point of view. I mean, I have
Mhm,
friends in the industry, and like I said, I don't really brand myself as a journalist, but I'm now creating content as well for the podcast, and I do see myself as to a certain extent as a journalist. But journalism in Singapore is regulated. Actually, journalism in most countries are regulated to a certain degree. But in terms of the Press Freedom Index, we are ranked pretty low in the Press Freedom Index. I think we sit, I can't remember what was the ranking, 160 out of, I think, over 300 countries or something. So it's pretty low.
mhm,
Um, I might get those numbers wrong, but I know in terms of the positioning, it's rather low for what is deemed as a first world country. But there are good reasons to that. There are reasons to how it's worked and how it creates a harmonious society. And there are also areas where it regulation can't quite intervene because of the online space. Because it's so wide that it's difficult to intervene. So you've got then your ad hoc content creators in terms of citizen journalism, to online publications coming up just online without print,
mhm,
and until you reach a certain threshold, then you are then being regulated, and you have to get yourself registered under a publishing act. So it is really interesting because you don't get that sort of regulation in the rest of the Southeast Asian countries.
mhm,
I would think that journalists are reasonably protected in Singapore.
mhm,
I think we are quite lucky in the sense that we aren't, if I may use the term, hunted down almost as it is in Philippines. Um, but there have been challenges, I think, by some journalists in raising certain issues where it may involve the government, it may involve affecting certain changes in the community and the society, basically also in form of activism as well, that there have been issues. So I'm not in I'm pretty impartial to that. I'm
mhm.
not saying that what's wrong or what's right, but I would say that it's pretty safe. Uh, there are systems, but it is not perfect, and it's I think it's far from being perfect, and there's still loads of fine tuning that needs to be done with it.
And that's amazing because communication agencies or like companies like Telemedia are there to support journalists from all over
Mhm.
the world. And right now, you're covering the scope of Southeast Asia, so that's a
Yeah.
very big responsibility, and you've handled it well, as I believe. And congratulations on what you do. So let's go back to the Ironing Board podcast, Heikel.
Yep.
You mentioned earlier that you began the podcast with a conversation with based on a conversation you had with your wife. And right now, the podcast has, as I believe it, has reached its second season.
Yes, it has. Yes.
That's amazing. So, among all the episodes that you have produced, what were some of the most memorable episodes that you had produced, and who are those guests whom you have interviewed that made an impact on um, the kind of conversation that you wanted
Mm.
to uh, go?
When I first started out the podcast, I thought that I would be looking at mostly medical issues. I thought that there was going to be loads of medical issues out there that people don't quite understand. So it could be from certain disabilities or certain conditions that people may have. Um, but after the first episode, which was on autism, which was very reasonably well received, I started to almost scour social media for potential guests and see whether I would be able to serve the notion of what, well, there's the tagline for the podcast is ironing out issues on board.
Oh,
So I was looking to iron out certain issues in society. And so, I, again, like I said, no, I go on social media, I go on Instagram, I go on random profiles, people who I haven't followed. I'll be looking at things that might be trending slightly for a certain reason, not majorly, somewhere in the middle, and see whether there are things that I can pick up. And interestingly, one of the common themes that have come up since then is mental health, and this is almost an accident. Um, and was not really intentional. I approached a guest of mine who was on the second episode of the first season. His name is Sham. And Sham is a young man in Singapore who was sharing on his Instagram about his struggles with depression.
mm-hmm.
And I thought it was very brave of him, and I invited him onto the show. Alongside him, I had someone who was working with a non-profit organization called Limitless, and he was giving a perspective of of his experiences working with people with depression. And that was one of the most popular episode because it tackled issues of mental health, not just on the basis of, oh, people have depression. We talked about mental health in a particular gender. I wasn't creating a gender divide. I was talking about how mental health is not being highlighted in men. And it was actually there was a heavier stigma on mental health in men than there was in women. And that was a problem because, this, there were statistics that show that suicide rates, for example, is a lot higher in males than in females. But in terms of mental health reports, it's a lot higher in females than in males. So there was that discrepancy that we're talking about, and we're talking about how important it is to make sure that men feel okay to speak about mental health, to not always be seen as strong, and that there are weaknesses, and how we are able to talk about that. So that was one of the most popular topics. But then from then, mental health just kept on coming back as a common theme, even in topics where I wasn't directly addressing mental health issues. So when we talk about gender discrimination, we had topics about how we are bringing up our children and there's mental health issues there. We talk about neighborliness, about harassment, and how children are being harassed, and how there's PTSD there. That's mental health again. So there are all these issues that came up, which has come up as a interesting theme for the podcast. But I do not want to really be branded as a mental health podcast. So because I want to cover lots of topics, I want to cover issues that I think people just generally don't feel they can talk about, but it's important for the society to hear more about. And for me, if I can affect one change to one person, then I would have done my job, because then hopefully it just it just snowballs from there, right? So that one person will tell one other, and yeah, just hopefully we just become a better society from there. But it just starts with me, right? So what am I going to do about it? I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to create a platform for people to be able to talk about it.
Right. And it's very relevant about that topic because, recently, just last year, there have been a lot of mental health issues going on because of the pandemic. There are some people who were not able to cope, and then who needed help, and then conversations such as mental health issues are um,
Mm,
on demand these days because not exactly like we want people to like we demand people to talk about it, but then it's important to hear people out because of how to address these issues. And yeah, I believe that what you're doing is amazing because you have um started this initiative to spread awareness, and you started with mental health issues, which is very relevant today. And now you have a
yeah.
lot of episodes where you talk about a lot of uh, like topics that are also relevant in our society in general, not just in Southeast
Mm,
Asia but around the world. I believe you're one of the latest
yep.
episodes that you talked was about gender inequality, right? That's also
Yes,
going
that's
on.
right. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean that was on just before International Women's Day, which
Yeah.
obviously is an ongoing conversation. I think we've made strides in it across the world. Some places better than others, but it's still an ongoing conversations that I want to have with others. And I think it's important as someone from the opposite gender to be able to speak about that, because it's difficult when women feels that they are hard done by and they are trying to push their own agenda. It feels slightly biased, isn't it? But if we as men are being able to support that, then it makes that conversations a bit easier. So I think there's a lot of ways that males can actually help that a little bit more by making that change first. Because if in lots of great places, if you are seen as a majority and the minorities are impacted, then the people that needs to change aren't the minorities. They would have voiced out, but the people that needs to change are the majority. So then I, as someone from the opposite gender, wanted to have that representation almost.
Right. That's a very amazing like contribution to the wide-ranging conversations that we have
Mm,
about gender issues and gender equality as well. So when you talk about like the platform these days, Heiko, and since you're also a content creator, let's go to the technical side of things.
yeah.
What are some ideal platforms that are relevant these days? Because in last year we have seen the trend of people going to like or like people transferring their um, uh, platforms online, and there's
Mm,
been a demand for that, and there has been like a trend where people have started consuming online content. And what do you think are the most like probably in your experience, based on your experience, the most popular or the most relevant and helpful platforms that people can, content creators like yourself can explore, and at the same time,
mm.
content consumers can also listen to or like consume or visit.
Sure. No, I think we've had conversations around digitalization for a better part of a decade right now.
Hmm.
So it is no longer Angelo. I'm just checking whether you're still online because
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
I'm
your
silly.
your
I
picture
think
has frozen up, Angelo. I can
the
repeat
internet
this.
has.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Okay. So let me just restart that answer. I was just saying that I think that the conversation of digitalization has been around for a better part of 10 years, if not more.
Mhm.
And it's still a conversation that we are having because it's so important and relevant, not because of just now people are jumping on the bandwagon of digital. It's because that digital space in itself has kept on evolving.
Right.
what was digitalization 10 years ago might be almost meaningless now. It's no longer just about having a website. It's about having a website that is interactive. Are you able to put pictures? Are you able to put videos? Are the quality good enough? Are you able to support it? Have you got any ways of breaking your news quicker to your audience? There's all those elements coming in. So I mean, I'm an independent content creator, so I may not be the best person to go to in terms of giving people recommendations on what to use. But as an independent content creator for my podcast, there are free platforms that's out there for you to be able to use, as to start out with.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are looking to push out content out there, I would always ask you to speak with people who's done it. And I know the podcast community pretty well, and I think it is an interesting community where we are quite open in sharing tips and ideas to each other. And it's for me, that's been a huge help
Mm-hmm.
in creating my podcast, in doing post production, in doing digital marketing to social media posts around it. So there's loads out there, so it's impossible for me to just go on this interview and just list down the myriad of platforms that we can use. But in terms of consumers as well, and this links back to my day job, right? Because I obviously can see the trends moving, that's come up. I am, without any biasness here, because I'm a podcaster, I must say that podcast has been a channel that's risen quite significantly over the past couple of years. And what's interesting is that because there's a slightly slower take up to this in Southeast Asia than we had in other parts of the world. So again, likes of Australia, the States, UK, podcasts have been popular for a long time. And this is when people were listening to podcasts on their classic iPods, not even iPhones, iPods. And podcasts have been around since then. But there's just been a warming up to it, if you like, in Southeast Asia in past couple of years.
Yeah.
Slightly more advanced marketing, the trends of mobile journalism, which means that people are pushing out stories on mobile, on platforms such as Instagram, where it's fully graphic, as well. So videos and pictures have been very, very um, popular platforms for people to consume content. And in Singapore specifically, there's been a rise of current affairs being covered, not in the traditional news sense, a little bit more localized, with a local twang, with the local language that you probably use with each other on the streets, that's a bit more identifiable. So those are the kind of things that I've seen that's a bit more consumerish, that people are able to find a lot of relevance with. So lots of human interest stuff as well over there. That does not mean that your traditional news platforms have gone obsolete, though. No, I think when the pandemic was a good judgment of that, when we were hit with COVID-19 and no one knew what it was about, everyone was jumping onto your traditional news platforms, and watching TV on the news channels that they knew from 15, 20 years ago, and trying to find out information. So there's loads of relevance there still. It's just that people are now seeking information from various sources, and not just from one or two. They are looking online, they're looking to their friends, they're looking to influencers as well, to be able to make the more informed decision, whether it might be lifestyle to parenting to next coffee that you're going to have tomorrow. It's all from everywhere. So that's been quite interesting.
Yeah, that's nice because trends these days keep on changing depending on
Yep.
the innovation of technology. And I agree with what you said earlier about podcasts being popular already in the West, but not yet so much in the East. And it's amazing that
Mhm.
these days, content creators from Southeast Asia in general are, trying to experiment with these content. And like yourself, I would like to congratulate you for the legacy so far that the Ironing Board podcast has done. And last question, Heiko. Um, what are your current projects this year? Because I believe that this year is more of like a a return for many of us who have plans that were postponed last year. And
Yeah.
I believe that you, as a content creator, as a communication professional, and as a someone who helps journalists in Southeast Asia, I
Mm,
believe that you have other, like very many things that you want to do, and also plans that you have been able to delay because of the pandemic last
mm.
year. And so this year, what are some things that you look forward to?
Um, One of the things that obviously has been starkly missing from my day job and from my plans is obviously travel, because it's something that I haven't been able to do. And as someone who oversees a region, travel has been a big part of my role, just visiting teams in local markets, engaging with media and communications professionals in each market, and that those have been important. So I've been that I hope that somehow returns this year in a safe manner though. So
Right.
I'm not quite keen to go around traveling and risk lives, for especially within our community. But the other thing that's obviously starkly missing are the in-person meetings that we haven't been able to do. There's a difference in conducting all of these great events that we have done through the one where we are I mean, events are great. We still have, budgets within venue sizes and etc. But there are limitations to that. So I hope those return as well. In terms of the podcast and what I do on a personal basis, I think my biggest project is to make sure that the ironing board is sustainable. I mean, running it. I do everything alone, like I said. So it's just keeping that sustainable. I would love to be able to increase the frequency of my content as well, and take whatever I want to do, the goals I want to achieve through the podcast outside of the podcast as well. I hope to be able to, in time, again, when it's safer, to create events around the podcast and certain issues around the podcast, that the podcast actually highlights, to campaign for certain issues and topics as well, to have a bigger reach, to make sure that that conversations does not end at the 45th minute when I actually, the podcast actually ends, right?
Yeah.
That it takes on further after that. So those are kind of things that I'm looking to be involved with. And separately also, I want to be involved with more organizations which, not necessarily linked to the earning board, but organizations who are just looking to do good. For me, again, I'm in Singapore, so for me it's about how the society in Singapore evolves, because that shapes our future generation, that impacts the lives of my children and their children thereafter. And if we don't make those conscious changes and the changes that we hope to happen, it will affect them. So if we have them in mind and want the best for them, then it's up to us to move forward with what we think is right.
Right. And I like that you are, thinking about your children's future because it
Mhm.
only emphasizes that, in Southeast Asia, I think one quality that we have in common, whether you're in Singapore, in Thailand, in Indonesia, or any other countries, like also in the Philippines, family is of utmost important. And we always have to.
Yes, family. Yes, exactly.
Right. And we always have to like look after our family members for their safety, protection, and future plans. So thank you once
Yep.
again for coming, Heiko. I know that we've had like difficulties with the internet, but you know how it is in the Philippines. The internet is quite not as good as the one you have in Singapore. But anyway, thank you very much for the informative insight that you have provided. And thank you very much for accepting the invitation for the interview. I know you have a very busy schedule, but then you took the time to come here and share your insight. So that's it, folks. Haikel Fahim, he is the host of the Ironing Board podcast and the head of Telemedia's Southeast Asian operations. Thank you very much, Haikel, for coming here. And I will post a link of the Ironing Board podcast in the descriptions of this YouTube video. So thank you once again.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.